14th, made inquiries from Brigade Major Harrison, who was stationed at Hut's Gate, if any alteration had been made in the orders so as to allow Napoleon to pass the picket at the gate and to go around by Miss Mason's and Woody Range unaccompanied by a British officer. Major Harrison replied that no change of orders to that effect had been given, and that if he attempted to pass, he would be stopped by the sentinels. He added that General Gourgaud had asked him the same question yesterday, to whom he had returned a similar answer. Cipriani in town purchasing sheep. 15th. Saw Napoleon in his bath. He was rather low-spirited and thoughtful. Made some observations about the governor's not having kept his word relative to the proposed intermediation through the medium of the admiral. The 17th. Madame Bertrand delivered of a fine boy at 4:30. Her accouchement was followed by some rather dangerous symptoms. Sir Hudson Lowe came up to Longwood and asked me if I had any conversation with Napoleon touching the admiral since he had seen me. I replied that he appeared much surprised that he, the governor, had not acted upon the proposed intermediation by means of the admiral. Sir Hudson Lowe observed that he had considered the negotiation to be broken off by General Bonaparte's having sent to him a number of strictures upon the restrictions of October last, written in a violent manner and containing falsehoods, and by the tenor of the remarks written upon the back of the answer delivered by him to the original proposition, that he was ignorant whether they had intended those remarks for his perusal or to be sent to England, that their frequent use of the word emperor in the strictures written by Count Bertrand was sufficient for him to break off the affair. I replied that the strictures had merely been sent by Napoleon for his own consideration. His Excellency then began to inveigh against countless causes, whom he accused of having been the cause of much mischief between Bonaparte and himself. Said he had asserted in his journal that Bonaparte had declared that he abhorred the sight of the British uniform or of a British officer, that he held both in abomination, and that I had better take an opportunity to tell him this, and add that I had heard him say, the governor say, that he did not believe that he had ever said so. Sir Hudson Lowe then asked me if I had informed General Bonaparte that he was at liberty to ride round Miss Mason's and Woody Range unaccompanied. I replied that I had, with that Major Harrison had asserted the contrary to General Gourgaud and myself. His Excellency said that since that time permission had been granted, of which he desired me to inform General Bonaparte, as well as of his reasons for not having gone on any further with the proposed intermediation. Also, that he daily expected good news from England for the French, and hoped he should be permitted by the English government to render their situation more comfortable. In the evening, however, His Excellency changed his mind and ordered me not to communicate anything to General Bonaparte on the subject of the ride to the left of Hut's Gate, but to mention everything else he had directed me. The 18th, Napoleon sent for me, complained of severe headache, and made many inquiries concerning Madame Bertrand, about whose state of health he appeared very anxious. I informed him of the real cause of the unpleasant symptoms which had appeared, acquainted him with the causes which the governor had assigned yesterday as his reason for not having proceeded farther in the proposed intermediation, and the other matters that I was directed to tell him. Napoleon replied, I never intended to break off the negotiation. The observations were sent to him because he asked for them himself and desired to know what we complained of. It was never intended as a refusal, nor to be sent to England, as it was only a copy of what I once intended to send. I wished, continued he, to have had the admiral present at any agreement which might be made in order to be able to call upon him hereafter as a man of honor and an Englishman, to bear witness to whatever was agreed upon, that the governor might not be able to change the orders and directions subsequently, deny what had been settled, and then say that he had changed nothing. But this governor never intended to call in the admiral. It was all a trick. sick. Et un uomo senza fede, a faithless man. I said that the governor had informed me that he had written to England and daily expected orders to ameliorate his condition. He has never written for any such thing, replied Napoleon. He sees that he has gone too far, and now he awaits the arrival of some ship from England in order that he may throw the weight and odium of those restrictions upon the ministers and say that he has written and gotten them taken off. The ministers have merely given him orders to take every precaution to prevent me from escaping. All the rest is discretional. He treats us as if we were so many peasants or poor simple creatures who could be duped by his shallow artifices. The adamant arrived from the Cape, a present of some fruit sent by Lady Malcolm to Napoleon. Went to town and procured some newspapers, which I gave to Napoleon on my return. Assisted in explaining some of the passages to him, repeated an anecdote which I had heard about his son, at which he laughed much, appeared entertained, and brightened up. Made me repeat it again. Asked about Marie Louise and desired me to endeavor to see all the newspapers had arrived in order that if I could not procure the loan of them, I should be able to inform him of anything they might contain relative to his wife and child. For, added he, one reason that this governor does not send up a regular series of papers is to prevent me from seeing any articles which he thinks would give me pleasure, especially such as contains some little information about my son or my wife. The 19th, Sir Hudson Lowe sent for me, proceeded to Plantation House, communicated to him Napoleon's reply to the message he had charged me to deliver on the 17th, concealing any offensive epithets and otherwise moderating the manner. Sir Hudson said that he had never asked for the observations on the restrictions, that he believed he had asked what they complained of, and that he was glad to know they had not intended to break off the accommodation by sending them. A little afterwards, however, His Excellency began to wax warm and said that the person who had ordered observations to be written couched in such language and containing lies could not be actuated by any conciliatory views, and he should take no positive steps in the matter, that he conceived a person's proposing an other for a mediator could have no other object in view than to make some concession or apology. If such were General Bonaparte's views, he, Sir Hudson, should think it advisable to employ one and not otherwise. He then asked me if such were General Bonaparte's intentions. I told His Excellency that I could assure him Napoleon had no such intentions, nor ever had. Sir Hudson, after some hazardous assertions relative to Napoleon's motives, got up, walked into another room, from whence he returned with a volume of the Quarterly Review, containing a review of Meaux's work upon Egypt, which he put into my hands, and with a triumphant laugh pointed out the following passage, which he desired me to read aloud. He, Bonaparte, understands enough of mankind to dazzle the weak, to dupe the vain, to overawe the timid, and to make the wicked his instruments. But of all beyond this, Bonaparte is grossly and brutally ignorant of the strength of patriotism, the enthusiasm of virtue, the fortitude of duty. He knows nothing and can comprehend nothing. During the time I was reading this, His Excellency indulged in bursts of laughter. He afterwards made me observe a definition of the word caractère in a posthumous work of Voltaire's, I think, of which he said General Bonaparte must have been ignorant, or he would not be so fond of using the word. Subsequently, Sir Hudson Lowe said that General Bonaparte ought to send the admiral to him. I observed that Sir Pulteney Malcolm would not undertake anything of the kind unless first spoken to and authorized by him, Sir Hudson, to undertake it. Not as he had now the complaints of the French in his possession, he might let the admiral know how far he would agree to their demands, and by making that officer acquainted with his intentions, the latter would know how to act and what answer to make. Sir Hudson recurred again to the language in which the observations on his restrictions were couched, and after a discussion which continued for some time, gave me a message similar to that which he had done on the 17th, with the addition that at the same time he had foreseen that the request to see Las Casas, which he could not grant, would probably break off the proposed accommodation. He then told me that I might borrow any books I liked from his library, excepting such as flattered Bonaparte too much. Shortly after, he gave me Pillay's libel upon England, Millot's expedition to Egypt, Amours secret de Napoleon, etc. I asked him if I might send Pillet to Napoleon. He said yes, and tell him that Pillet knows just as much about England as Las Casas. His Excellency then took from a shelf a book called Les Imposteurs, Insignes ou Histoire de plusieurs hommes de néant de toute nation qui ont usurpé la qualité de empereur, de roi, et de prince. Put it into my hand, and with peculiar regret said, "You had better take General Bonaparte this also. Perhaps he might find some characters in it resembling himself." The 20th, Cipriani in town, purchasing meat, butter, and other necessities. Sir Thomas Reed, very active in assisting him to procure them. The 21st, saw Napoleon in the evening, gave him Pillay's libel, mentioning at the same time some of the falsehoods contained in it, amongst others the incestuous practices which the wretch who wrote it asserted to be prevalent in England. He appeared surprised and shocked at this, and observed that malice frequently defeated itself. When I mentioned that Pillet had asserted that the French naval officers were more skillful and maneuvered better than the English, he smiled contemptuously and observed, "Truly they have proved it by the result of their actions." I then told him that I had got a book entitled Amours secret de Napoleon Bonaparte, but that it was a foolish work. He laughed and desired me to bring it to him. "It will at least make me laugh," said he. I accordingly brought it. He observed a print in the book which represented him plunging a sword into a balloon because the manager of it would not let him ascend, and remarked, "It is believed by some that I did what is represented here, and I have heard that it was asserted by persons who knew me well, but it's not true. The circumstance represented really occurred, but the actor was one of the comité, a young man of great bravery, of a singular appearance and peculiar manner, always elevated upon his tiptoes, and loving to walk near the brink of precipices." Someone came into the room now, to whom he cried, "Eh bien, voilà mes amours secrets. Here are my private loves." He then ran through the book, read out some parts, laughing very heartily, but observed that it was monstrous and silly, that they had not even described him to be a wicked man. After having perused a portion of it which I had not read, he shut the book and returned it, observing that there was not a single word of truth in the anecdotes, and even the names of the greatest number of the females mentioned were unknown to him. Napoleon sat up late at night reading P.A., and I was informed that he was heard repeatedly to burst into loud fits of laughter. The 22nd, Napoleon employed a considerable portion of the day in dictating his memoirs to Counts Bertrand and Montauban in the billiard room, which he has converted into his cabinet de travail, a working room. Occasionally he amuses himself with collecting the balls together and endeavoring to roll them all into the opposite corner pocket. Sir Hudson Lowe set me up some coffee for Napoleon's own use, which he said was of very good quality, and which he strongly recommended. 23rd, Napoleon in good spirits spoke about P.A.'s book, observed that he had no recollection of such a name, Probably, said he, being some person who has been harshly treated by you in the prison ships, pontons, and has written in a bad humor and full of malice against the English, which is evidently displayed in his work. There is, continued he, only one statement in the book, which I believe to be correct, viz. That relative to the treatment of the prisoners in the pontons, it was barbarous on the part of your government to immure a number of poor wretches of soldiers who had not been accustomed to the sea on board a ship so many hours every night without fresh air. And there was something horrid, continued he, in the treatment of the prisoners in England. The very idea of being put on board of a ship and kept there for several years has something dreadful in it. Even your seamen hate the idea of being always on board of ships and run to seek the delight to the shore whenever they can. There was nothing which so much irritated the nations of the continent against you. For your ministers not only heaped Frenchmen in them, but also prisoners of all other nations at war with you. I received so many complaints about the barbarous treatment to which they were subjected in the pontons, a treatment so contrary to that practiced in France towards the English, that at last I gave orders that all the English prisoners should be put on board of pontons, which were to be prepared for that purpose and to be treated precisely as you treated mine in England. Had I remained in France, it would have been carried into execution and would have had a good effect, for I would have given every liberty and facility to the English so confined to vent their complaints. And your ministry would, in spite of themselves, have been obliged to remove the French from the pontons, in order that a similar measure might be adopted towards the English in France. I observed that the treatment of the French prisoners in England had not been near so bad as was stated by many, especially by P.A. Napoleon replied, I have no doubt that the statement is exaggerated, but still they were treated in a most barbarous and oppressive manner. The mere putting of soldiers on board of ships is itself cruel. Now in France, all the English were treated well. At least my intentions towards them were good. Some abuses existed, doubtless, as there always will be under similar circumstances. But that was not my fault. Whenever they came to my knowledge, I always punished the guilty. There was very young. As soon as I found out his robberies, I gave orders to have him tried, and I would have had him hanged if, dreading the result, he had not shot himself. Others did the same. It is impossible that any government could have given more lenient directions for the treatment of prisoners of war than those which were issued by me. But I could not help some abuses being practiced. I always punished the authors of them when they came to my knowledge. Let the thousands of English prisoners who were in France be asked to state candidly the manner in which they were treated. There are some of them now in this island. When they attempted to escape and were taken, then indeed they were closely confined, but never were treated in such a barbarous manner as you treated mine in your pontons. Your ministers made a great noise about my having employed French prisoners who had broken their paroles and escaped, but the prisoners of your nation were the first to set the example to escape, and your ministers employed them afterwards. In retaliation, I of course did the same. I published the names of several Englishmen who broke their parole previous to the French having done so, and who were afterwards employed by you. Nay, I did more. I made an offer to your ministers to send back all the French prisoners who had violated their parole from the beginning of the war, provided they would, in like manner, send back all the English who had done the like. They, however, refused to consent to this. What more could I do? Your ministers made a great outcry about the English travelers that I detained in France, although they themselves had set the example by seizing upon all the French vessels and persons on board of them upon whom they could lay their hands either in their harbors or at sea before the declaration of war and before I had detained the English in France. I said then, if you detain my travelers at sea, where you can do what you like, I will detain yours at land, where I'm equally powerful. But after this, I offer to release all the English I had seized in France before the declaration of war, provided you would in like manner release the French and their property, which you had seized on board of the ships. Your ministers refused. Your ministers, continued he, never publish all the truth, unless they cannot avoid it, or when they know that it will come to the knowledge of the public through other channels. In other cases, they turn, disguise, or suppress everything as best answers their views. I made some observations relative to the calumnious assertions of PA of the general depravity alleged by him to exist among the English ladies, and the horrible assertions he had put forth and maintained that in no country was there less reason for supposing that an improper connection existed between near relations, nor in any country were there to be found females more delicate or more irreproachable in their mode of life, pointing out to the emperor that it was evident PA had kept very low company by his assertions about sweethearts, which I explained was a word in habitual use only amongst chambermaids, low shopkeepers' daughters, and others of a similar rank, although PA had the impudence to assert that such a term was in familiar use with the young ladies of the first respectability. True, said Napoleon. I fancy that he never saw any English woman on board of his ship except Putani of the lowest class. He had, continued he, a fine opportunity truly of learning the manners and customs of the English, confined as he was on board of a ponton for 7 or 8 years. He defeated his own intention, for in some parts he has written so many lies and horrors of the English that the truth which he has stated in another part will not be credited. His hook is like those which have described me as a monster delighting in bloodshed, in crimes and atrocities, that merely to gratify a sanguinary disposition I drove my carriage over the bodies of the killed and wounded in battle. His book is just as true, and in like manner defeats the intention of the publisher. I was indeed pleased to see those violent works, as I knew that no person of sense or reason would believe them. Those written with an appearance of moderation and impartiality were the only ones I had means to fear. I asked the emperor then if he had read Millot's history of the expedition to Egypt. What? This commissary, replied he. I believe Las Casas gave me a copy. Moreover, it was published in my time. He then desired me to bring the one which I had, in order that he might compare them. He observed, Millot was a polisson blackguard, whom, together with his brother, I raised from the dirt. He says that I threatened him for writing the book, which is a falsehood. I said to his brother once that he might as well not have published untruths. He was a man who had always fear before his eyes. What does he say about the poisoning affair and the shooting at Jaffa? I replied that as to the poisoning, Millot declared he could say no more than that such had been the current report, but that he positively asserted that he, Napoleon, had caused between 3,000 and 4,000 Turks to be shot some days after the capture of Jaffa. Napoleon answered, it is not true that there were so many. I ordered about 1,000 or 1,200 to be shot, which was done. The reason was that amongst the garrison of Jaffa, a number of Turkish troops were discovered, whom I had taken a short time before at El Arish and sent to Baghdad upon their parole not to serve again or to be found in arms against me for a year. I had caused them to be escorted 12 leagues on their way to Baghdad by a division of my army, but those Turks, instead of proceeding to Baghdad, threw themselves into Jaffa, defended it to the last, and cost me a number of brave men to take it, whose lives would have been spared if the others had not reinforced the garrison of Jaffa. Moreover, before I attacked the town, I sent them a flag of truce. Immediately afterwards, we saw the head of the bearer elevated on a pole over a wall. Now, if I had spared them again and sent them away upon their parole, they would directly have gone to St. Jean d'Acre, where they would have played over again the same scene that they had done at Jaffa. In justice to the lives of my soldiers, as every general ought to consider himself as their father, and them as his children, I could not allow this. To leave as a guard a portion of my army already small and reduced in number in consequence of the breach of faith of those wretches was impossible. Indeed, to have acted otherwise then as I did would probably have caused the destruction of my whole army. I therefore, availing myself of the rights of war, which authorized the putting to death prisoners taken under such circumstances, independent of the right given to me by having taken the city by assault, and that of retaliation on the Turks, ordered that the prisoners taken at El Arish, who, in defiance of their capitulation, had been found bearing arms against me, should be selected out and shot. The rest, amounting to a considerable number, were spared. I would, continued he, do the same thing again tomorrow, and so would Wellington, or any general commanding an army under similar circumstances.